Hello, and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Space Age, where I'm doing a bit of a retrospective, where I'm going to look back and have a think about how I did all the various different things on my planets, and whether I do things differently if I played again. And so today I'm going to look at the various science packs and how I produced them. Initially, I started off by building them on the bus, as tends to be my way, because when you start playing, that's where all of your resources are, so it kind of makes sense to build stuff there. So previously I had, I think, red and green science in this gap here, blue science, well, I've still got the machines placed down here for making it, and they're not running at the moment, as you can see, but they are still here, and then so on, all the way up and for all of the science packs. And as I say, I felt this made sense. It was where all my resources were, so why not? And I also had the labs on the bus as well, so I could ship the science along the bus to the labs and start doing the science there. Eventually, in a Factorio game, I tend to get to the point where the science can't be produced quickly enough on the bus, perhaps because it's demanding too many resources, and so I end up moving it off. And in traditional Factorio, I would have set up some towns somewhere. Maybe there'd be a red science town down here and a green science town over here, and so on. And they'd all build all the science packs up and then ship them by train to the relevant place. However, this is Space Age, and so things have been a little bit different. Rather than building everything on Nauvis that I can, I've been moving them off elsewhere because, well, eventually some of these patches will start to run out. There's a decent amount of iron ore up here, sure, and these drills get you twice as much out, and there's lots of efficiencies in my processes on Nauvis. But even so, if I can take the load off this planet somewhere else, then it's going to be much, much better. The first science pack is, of course, red science. And that is made entirely from iron and copper. The iron, granted, has to be turned into gears, and the copper has to be turned into plates. But that's easy enough to do, and those are both just straight up iron and copper. And that means Vulcanus is the perfect place to do it, because as I've discussed previously, Vulcanus can produce essentially unlimited quantities of iron and copper just by pulling lava out of the ground here, and then turning it into the steady stream of iron and copper. And so I've got that flowing in here, it's coming up the pipes, going into these two foundries over here, to make, and I can make it directly into gears, and I can make it directly into copper plates, and then they're fed into all of these machines that will produce all of the red science I need. Now I've chucked a few modules in here to keep the speed about where I want it to be. I think that might be a little bit unnecessary given how many gears and how many copper plates we have backed up along the belt here with all of these machines running flat out. But it was enough to make sure that I had plenty of everything. I also put some beacons along the middle here, which I can then put some speed modules into, which will cover absolutely everything with one beacon per machine, if I decide in the future that I need this system to run a bit more quickly. And I might be getting close to that point now, but as I've discussed previously, I'm basically done. So yes, this is producing all of the red science, and that's pouring off down a belt, down here, where it goes into storage in these boxes, and then is fed into a rocket to be taken up to a spaceship and brought over to Nauvis. As you might have noticed if you were paying attention as I scrolled around then, I'm also doing green science here, because green science is also iron and copper, and that's all. However, this needs a little bit more processing first, so you need to make some of the iron and some of the copper into cables, and then into green circuits, which you can then turn into inserters with some gears and some plates, which I can make along here, and that produces me this steady stream of inserters, which I can feed through. And similarly, I also need to produce some belts, and that again takes plates and gears, so those are being fed from the foundries, directly from the supply of molten iron into a machine here, and then they can come up here, and these can be made into the green science packs. This one will be slightly more complicated to beacon and speed module than the other system. Although that said, looking at this, there are very few speed modules in the system already, so I think it would be quite easy to go in and just put in maybe one or two speed modules into every single machine and have everything run that bit faster and produce more of the output I need, and then produce more green science. Those are coming along here right next to the red science, and in exactly the same way they're going into some boxes down here ready to be fed into a rocket which can take them up into space. So it's basically the same system as before. Both of these are perfect candidates for Vulcanus because they literally just use the ingredients that are functionally free on this planet. The next one on the list is the grey military science, and this is slightly more complicated. Firstly, it requires piercing rounds. These ones are great because they consist of copper and steel, which comes from both from the molten metals we've got pumped around on Vulcanus, and firearm magazines, which take iron, which again comes directly from that metals. So the piercing round magazines, we can make these straight out of the molten metals. That's again free, easy, no problem there at all. The other two are a little bit harder. Let's look at walls first. So walls require stone bricks require stone. And the process we have down here for making the molten iron and the molten copper out of the lava does produce stone as a byproduct. So we've got quite a lot of that available. So I've been feeding that up on a belt along here. And as long as I'm making a decent amount of red and or green science at the same time, then we tend to have quite a good load on the molten metals, which means there is a nice healthy supply of stone coming through. And I can feed that all the way up along here, in here, and then turn it all into bricks, which can then be made into walls and passed up here to be made into grey science. So that's great. I'm also passing some of the spare bricks through here to level them up a little bit and try and capture a few of the tier 4 and tier 5 bricks, because I had uses for those in the past. But essentially this area is just producing lots and lots of bricks, making them into walls, feeding them up to the science, and that is the priority. The third ingredient is the grenades, and those take iron and coal in order to make them. So the iron, again, easy, free, no problems there. But the coal, well, the coal we have to dig up out of the ground. We do have a steady supply of coal on this planet coming from over here, and so I decided that it was probably safe and probably sensible to produce the grey science out on Vulcanus. I think making the grey science here was the right decision. The ammunition is obviously great to produce here because it's completely free. It's just made out of the metals, fine. The walls, they're made out of the byproducts of making the metals, so again, that's pretty good. The only slight query is the grenades, because they require the coal, but we do seem to have a decent supply of coal on this planet. It's going quite well, so I'm pretty happy with the decision I made for this. And you tend not to use the grey science up as much as the others. If we have a quick look at the researches we do, ignoring the research productivity, unless you're doing actual weapon sciences like railgun shooting speed or explosive damage or that sort of thing, nothing else uses the military science. So, for example, mining productivity just uses basic stuff, steel plate productivity, basic stuff, or even up to asteroid productivity. That uses the agricultural science, but it doesn't use military. Over here, rocket part productivity uses the cryogenic science, but once again, not the military science. The research productivity, however, uses absolutely everything. So, and those tend to be quite big researchers at this point. So this is sort of the test for your entire factory to make sure everything runs nicely. But in general, you can get away with quite a lot of not using the grey science packs. So this has been okay. And once again, they're fed over to here, filling up these boxes over here. So we've got almost 20,000 grey science packs stockpiled over here, which means there's plenty to ship off by spaceship back over to Nauvis to do the science. The next one on the list is slightly trickier. This is the blue science, the chemical science packs. And these require lots of slightly weird things. So first on the list is sulfur, which is typically created from petroleum gas, but there is also biosulfur and carbonic asteroid crushing recipes for it as well. Then there's red circuits, which is metal in various forms down here, but also plastic. And plastic requires coal and, again, petroleum gas. So I didn't really want to do this one over on Vulcanus, because both of these two would require significant amounts of oil or oil products, and that would mean ripping through a lot more coal, and I wasn't entirely happy with that. The engine units are just metal in various forms, so those are relatively easy. That would have been fine on Vulcanus, but the other two sort of gave me a bit of a pause, and I didn't really want to do those on Vulcanus because I was worried that I'd run out of coal. So instead, I've come over to Gleba, and this seems a little bit silly at first thought, but actually if you think about it a little bit harder, it's actually a really good place to make the blue sciences, because we can make the sulfur and bioplastic out of just fruit stuff, so that's available in quite large quantities, and in fact the sulfur, what do we need? Okay, we need bioflux to make it, and some spoilage. That's easy enough. We've got a decent, as you can see, we've got both of those flowing merrily along here, and we've got a nice healthy belt of sulfur. We've got absolute oodles of that. One or two machines is producing enough to keep us happy there. The bioplastic recipe is, I don't even know where that is, somewhere up here. There we go. So this requires some actual fruit. So again, bioflux and this time Yamako mash, but we've got plenty of that. And as you can see here, we have plenty of plastic available. So this is working really nicely. We've got good healthy supplies of those. The metals are being made, or it's actually, I think it's just iron for this one, for the motors, although actually no, copper as well for the circuits. Those are being made through the through the bacteria recipes, and I've got a steady stream of iron ore coming out here, copper ore coming out down here. This is nice and healthy. This is working well. The copper isn't quite, actually no, the copper is okay. It just needs to sort of, yeah, if we started using it, then we get a lot more flowing through, and I think it would work a lot better. So it's limited by demand rather than supply. And those then come down here, and I'm using foundries because I brought these in from over on Vulcanus, just to give Gleba that upgrade and get things working a bit more nicely. So we've got, again, down here, nice healthy streams of iron plate, copper plate, steel, gears, cables, and more iron plates, and all of those there's a plentiful supply of those to make all of the blue science I could possibly need. That then runs down here. We've got lots and lots of machines down here, although it looks like I haven't actually finished this section off because there's meant to be a supply of the various things coming in down here. So let's just quickly finish this off. There we go. Get the bots to bring those over, and then this system down here will also kick in, and we'll start making even more blue science. That said, it doesn't seem to be a problem. As you can tell here, half the belt is completely backlogged all the way down to production now, and we've got the same sort of thing you saw over on Vulcanus, where I'm feeding all of the science packs up to a couple of chests up here to store them, where they can then be fed into a rocket here, taken up to a spaceship, and then taken over to Norvis in the sort of the numbers that we need. And this is, as you can tell, we've got a plentiful supply of these. We've got 9.6 thousand in there. We've got 8.6 thousand in there. That's good and healthy. Now, if I wanted to make this slightly better, I'd run this belt up around here and load them both from the belt rather than loading this box from this box, because that would be slightly more efficient. But never mind. I mean, it works. I'm not gonna go and faff around with it because I think I'm pretty happy with this. It does seem to be supplying the blue science fast enough. The only real downside of doing things like this is it means a bit more stuff happening on Gleba, and Gleba is definitely, Gleba isn't in it a whole thing, shall we say. It can be a bit of a faff to deal with, but you know, I'm kind of used to it now. I've got a reasonably effective system on Gleba, and so it's working. I'm not gonna mess around with it too much. I'm just gonna be reasonably happy with the state it's in. And there's a little bit more finishing off needed up here, I think. So if I do that and that and this and that, then we'll be able to ship out the blue science that's being made from the new system. This will now allow me to make blue science a little bit faster, but as we saw, we're already making it about as fast as it's required. So yeah, it's fine. It's working nicely, and yeah, I'd say I'm happy with the way it's going. Gleba is capable of producing all of the resources I need at a sufficient rate to keep up with the blue science demand. The next one on the list is the purple production science, and this requires enormous quantities of stone and steel and circuits. So the rail requires stone and steel and a little bit of iron, okay. The electric furnaces require stone in the form of bricks, they require red circuits, require steel, and productivity modules require red and green circuits. So after a bit of umming and erring, and especially because after I moved the grey science off to Vulcanus, I was starting to struggle with the supply of stone over there, I felt that trying to use even more stone on Vulcanus was probably not the best idea. Additionally, all these red circuits are using plastic, and back at the time when I was originally setting this up, I didn't have a particularly good supply of plastic on Vulcanus. Now I'm shipping it in from Gleba and there's loads of it, but back then I was actually making it from the coal on that planet, so I didn't really want to do that there. So I thought about this. I didn't want to do it on Vulcanus because it required too much plastic. I didn't want to do it on Gleba because it required stone, and there's no stone on Gleba. I didn't want to do it on Fulgora because Fulgora was generally struggling. It was just trying to produce enough of all the bits and pieces on Fulgora was, let's just say, it wasn't working as well as I would like it to. And the way stuff is made on Fulgora means it's just weird. And trying to make anything at all on Aquilo that I don't have to is just lunacy, so I wasn't going to do that. And so that kind of left me with just Norvis. So this is now the only science pack that is being actually made on Norvis. And so I've got a set of machines over here. We've got loads of machines making rail. I've been steadily upgrading them because on quite a few occasions the purple science has been the limiting factor, although now we have a decent healthy amount of it backed up along the belt over here. So that's why there's beacons scattered through here with speed modules in them. All of these machines making rail and stacking it up on the output belts. We've got loads and loads of rail coming around here to be made into the purple science. Then loads of machines making the modules. Actually, slightly more machines than I need making the modules because these EM plants are really, really fast. I suspect I upgraded fairly recently from assembly machines to EM plants and forgot how much faster they are, how many more modules you can put in, and you get a bonus 50% of absolutely everything out from them. So they're a little bit overkill, but on the flip side, I'd rather have too many than too few. Speaking of too few, over here I'm trying to make the electric furnaces, and we seem to have run out of one of the inputs. Oh, this is stone bricks. So yeah, we are currently ripping through stone bricks much faster than we're producing them, and that means the electric furnaces are struggling, and that means purple science is struggling. And we can follow this back and go, why are you a problem? And it seems to be that there is no stone being fed in. So if we look over here, we can see the stone station is empty, and we can say, where is your train? And then we'll say, okay, here it comes. The stone train is just arriving. So here is a load of stone. But maybe it's insufficient. Maybe I need to put in another stone train to go out and get more stone and bring that over to here. Again, I'm not going to bother faffing around with this because I've finished the game. But in theory, these are the sort of things that I could be improving. So yeah, the stone will come through here. We'll get a nice healthy supply of it. And we can start making the bricks. And then maybe we'll start to make the science packs a little bit more quickly. And a couple of minutes later, you can see the stone bricks are starting to flow in. They're not coming in quite as quickly as I would like. They are just about keeping the machines running, but only just. So it'd be nice if we could have a few more bricks coming in, and maybe not be loading them with long inserters. That might help a little bit as well. But yeah, over here we've got a stack of furnaces making the bricks, but it's insufficient. Once again, this is another area that needs a bit of expansion. I think at this point, if I was carrying on playing, then I would move production of purple science over to Vulcanus and then start bringing the plastic over from Gleba. And I did the maths on this one, and it worked out that it's actually better to bring the plastic over than the red circuits, because if we look at plastic, you can fit 2,000 into a rocket. If we look at the red circuits, you can fit 1,000 into a rocket, and it takes 2 plastic bars to make an advanced circuit. So that's the same amount of plastic, whether it's in the form of plastic or in the form of red circuits. And then the rest of these things that go into the red circuits, the copper and the iron for the green circuit, are much cheaper on Vulcanus, so you're better off shipping the plastic over there and then making it into red circuits on Vulcanus and building over there. So yes, I think in hindsight, now that I've got the plastic being shipped from Gleba to Vulcanus, I would start producing the purple science on Vulcanus as well, because there is a decent amount of stone there, especially now that we're starting to produce even more science packs over there. And the rest of the ingredients will be essentially infinite. So I think it would be quite a lot better to do this over there. But it's working over here well enough. The stone patches on Norvis are fairly healthy. As you can see, we've got 4.5 million over there. It's going quite merrily. We just need to make sure there's enough being brought in, which is where it struggles. So there you go. The train has just departed, and already it's run out. The boxes are empty. So perhaps I do need more trains bringing it in. Perhaps I need to make it somewhere else and have more. And again, or maybe make it really close to the stone mine. At the moment, we're just not producing stone fast enough to keep the whole system happy. So that's a little bit awkward, but it has worked well enough to get us to this stage. The next one on the list is the yellow science. And this requires, as you can see, it requires blue circuits, it requires flying robot frames, which are steel, batteries, green circuits, and electric engines. And the electric engine requires electronic circuits and lubricant. So basically, this is largely metals. So that's all metal, that's all metal. That comes from oil, metal, mostly metal, but also some sulfuric acid. So you can see there's a lot of metals in there, but there are a few other things as well. Like the oil and the acid are a little bit tricky, and those are both oil-related products. Then you've got the low-density structures, which are copper, steel, and plastic. So this one, I ummed and erred about this a little bit, and then I looked at Fulgora, and I saw that from the recycling, we're getting processing units and low-density structures out in not insignificant quantities. If we look at the scrap recycling, you can see that we're getting 1% of the time we'll get a low-density structure, 2% of the time we'll get a processing unit. That felt at the time like quite a lot of both of those things. So I thought, okay, let's move all of the yellow science production over onto Fulgora, and I built up this fairly significant production facility here, because yellow science is quite slow to produce. It needs a lot of machines to do it, because it's quite a slow recipe. It takes a long time to actually make some, and then everything else wasn't too bad to make. So you can see over here we've got the low density structures and the blue circuits coming in, and what was the other thing? Oh yeah, and the flying robot frames are coming from over here. We've got all the bits. We've got the green circuits coming in, and the electric motors are being made over here by recycling some cogs down into iron to make the pipes. The steel's coming straight in from the recycling to make the engines, to make the electric engines, and lube is really easy because we've got these massive lakes of heavy oil, so we can just pull that straight out, turn it instantly into lube. That's really easy. And so yeah, this whole thing, it came together quite nicely, and it was basically working. The problem is, it turns out that when you start trying to do these sort of things on this sort of industrial scale, the amount of low-density structure and blue circuit coming out of these recycling machines, it's actually not that much, and it's woefully inadequate for keeping this level of science production running, especially as you also need blue circuits and low-density structures in order to build your rockets to launch those. So I spent a lot of time going through trying to make initially more low density structures, and then it came over to being more blue circuits. And so I've got large amounts of copper being dropped in from space, either in the form of ore or as copper plates, and then that's all being passed around here. We're making plastic, some of which is being made from carbon that's dropped from space to make the coal, to make the plastic. Some of it's coming out of recycling, and then that's being made into low density structures in quite significant quantities, and that's making probably more low density structures. So there's probably more coming out of the production facilities over here than there is coming out of the recycling, and that's kind of awkward. Similarly with the blue circuits, we're getting some of that out of the recycling, but again, not enough. So I'm having to capture a load of the red circuits that are coming through here, and then make green circuits. So once again, from the iron and copper that's being dropped down from space, or from any iron that I can pull out from the recycling system, I'm then trying to make green circuits and keep that, and use that to keep the blue circuit production running, to keep everything going. And at the moment, it seems to be the low-density structures that are the limiting factor. We've got plenty of blue circuits, but not so many low-density structures. But if we look over at the rocket area, we can see that in these boxes there is actually there's about 3,500 for each of the rockets. So that's not amazing, but we do at least have a supply of yellow science that we can ship out. So yeah, the yellow science. Again, I'm not really convinced that I've done this in the right way. It got to the point where I got it set up, built like this, it was kind of working, and I can be fairly stubborn with these sort of things, where I go, well, I'm doing it here, I want to keep doing it here, and I want to carry on with this, and just keep it running, keep it ticking over, try and improve it, rather than admit defeat, up camp and go off and do it somewhere else. However, with the benefit of hindsight, I think this is probably another one that would benefit from being done over on Vulcanus, because again, you just can't beat the free metals that you get on that planet. So once again, the processing units, well, that's green circuits which are free, red circuits which with the plastic coming in from Gleba are free, and sulfuric acid which you just pump out of the ground on Vulcanus. So that's very, very straightforward. The flying robot frames are, well, you need a little bit of lube for the electric engine units. That would be a little bit tricky. That would have to come from coal liquefaction, which is not ideal, and will put a lot of load on the heavy oil part of the coal liquefaction rather than the light oil and the petroleum gas, which means you might start to struggle and back up on the other two. You could turn them into plastic or into rocket fuel, sure, but again, there's the risk of you're just using up resources for the coal for the sake of it. So the lube, I feel a little bit less happy about. I don't know how I would do that ideally, unless I start shipping electric engine units in from Gleba, but that seems a little bit silly, to be honest. Although you can fit 400 in a rocket, so it's not too bad. The electronic circuits and steel plates are both free because they're just metals. The batteries are metal, and again acid, which comes straight out of the ground, so that's okay. And then the low density structures, well, we would use this recipe, which is molten iron, molten copper, and plastic. So again, we'd need to continue bringing massive quantities of plastic over from Gleba. But given that we're doing that, and as long as we're able to keep that supply of plastic running, then the low density structures aren't really a problem. The only concern I have about that is the lube for the electric engines for the flying robot frames. I'm a little bit uncomfortable making that on Vulcanus because I would worry that it would cause the other two oil types to back up and cause issues. Yes, you could get round it, but it would again be using up more coal for the sort of when we don't have an infinite supply of coal over there. That said, there are decent supplies of coal, so maybe it wouldn't be too bad. And as I also said, I could bring them over from Fulgora or from Gleba, and that would probably be okay. Maybe even bring the flying robot frames over. You can only get 150 of those in a rocket. But you can get 400 electric engine units. So I think I'd ship the electric engine units, and then whether that would be from Fulgora or from Gleba, either way, that's probably the one to do, because that's probably that's your densest point, I suspect. Unless you ship the actual lube itself, because you could put the lube into barrels and ship that over, and you can get a lot of barrels in a rocket. I don't know. I think we just have to assume that at some point we get to the stage of the game where launching rockets is cheap enough that you don't really need to worry about it. If the resources can't be grown on that particular planet, then you bring them in from wherever. And so, in summary, making the red science on Vulcanus makes sense, making the green science on Vulcanus makes sense, making the grey science on Vulcanus makes sense, making the blue science on Vulcanus is a possibility but doesn't really make much sense. That one's better on Gleba. Making the purple science on Vulcanus makes sense. Making the yellow science on Vulcanus makes sense. There's a bit of a theme going on here, isn't there? So yeah, pretty much all of the science, with all of the basic sciences, with the probable exception of the blue, I think making all of those on Vulcanus, it would be the way to go. The rest of them are all a little bit funny, and so they are very much restricted. So the space science pack, for example, you have to make it on a space platform, because it just has to be. That is the rules. Even if you've got the ice and the iron plate and the carbon onto a planet somewhere, you still can't make that science pack there. Just not allowed. Metallurgic science pack requires 4,000 pascals. HPA of pressure, whatever an HPA is, I'm not quite sure. Some hectopascals? Let's Google this. Okay, it is indeed hectopascals, and therefore hundreds of pascals. For some reason, that seems to be the standard, rather than, normal SI multipliers like kilo. But sure, we'll go with that. So anyway, but that means you have to produce them on Vulcanus. No getting around that. Similarly, the biological science has to be made on Gleba. The EM science has to be made on the magnetic field, has to be on Fulgora. The cryo has to be made on Aquilo. And the Promethean, well, the Promethean can be made anywhere in space. So that's slightly more interesting. And I feel this is a real shame. This means that even if you transport the bits and pieces, even if I started taking the holmium from Fulgora to somewhere else, I wouldn't be able to then make those science packs anywhere else. Which is a little bit disappointing, partly because one of the things I quite fancied doing was building a massive science production ship that makes all of the science packs on this one spaceship and does the science, has the labs on that ship too, and then it just flies around the solar system, picking up the resources that it needs to do so. So if I did want to do that, then I still sort of could, but all of the science productions would actually, for the exotic sciences, would have to be done on their individual planets. It wouldn't be enough to just fly out to Aquilo and pick up the lithium plates and the fluoroketone, then fly over to Gleba and pick up the pentapod eggs and the bioflux, and so on and so on. You would have to do it all on the relevant planets, which I feel is a little bit of a shame, but I'm sure that could easily be modded out if I did want to make that massive science ship. Similarly to having to make the exotic sciences on their specific planets, well, there are two types of science labs. There is the basic lab, which is okay, it has 2 module slots, it researches at a speed and so on, and then there is the massively better biolab, that runs at twice the speed, uses half the science packs for each science that it does, it's got about twice as much health, no, it produces pollution, which the other one doesn't, which is interesting, it's got twice as many module slots, and apparently some fire resistance, sure, why not? But so because they've got this science pack drain of 50%, and also, to be honest, because they're faster, that's nice as well, but mostly because you get twice as much science per science pack, you almost have to use these labs. They are so much better. However, the biolabs can only be built on Nauvis. You just straight up aren't allowed to put them on other planets. You can't, even if you transport them over there, it won't let you place them. And that feels like a shame. And now the main reason it feels like a shame is because it'd be very, very nice to put these over on Gleba so that we could feed the agricultural sciences in when they're as fresh as possible. Because if we have a look in the box here, see what we've got, well, these ones are all at about 70%, because it's taken almost 20 minutes to get them over here. And so that means that not only are they going to go off in 43 minutes or whatever, they're also only going to be 75% effective, because when you do science with a partially spoiled science pack, you only get part of a science's worth of science out of it. So we've got a mining productivity research going at the moment. Let's put in another research productivity research like that. Switch all the labs over, because then we are going to use the agricultural sciences, and you can see that these ones are going down significantly quicker than the rest of them, because they're only at about 2/3 freshness. So you only get about 2/3 of the amount of science out of any given one of these before it runs out and you have to put in a new one. And so if we could put these labs over on Gleba, we'd be able to get full effectiveness, or at least significantly more effectiveness out of the science packs. And so it would be a little bit better, and probably worth the effort of shipping all the science packs over there, I suspect. But you can't, so I guess I think it's a deliberate thing to make you have to do your science on Nauvis, rather than just bringing everything over to Gleba and doing it there, and trying to sort of sidestep the freshness puzzle that it involved. So yeah, earlier in this video, I discussed the possibility and the nice idea of having a ship that just wanders around in space building science packs. And this one does that to a slight extent. It will fly out to outside the solar system and collect the promethium from these large asteroids. So we'll shoot that asteroid in a moment, like that, and then the grabometrons we've got in down here, they're collecting lots and lots of promethium, and then feeding it in down here and putting it onto a storage system, which is an extremely large quantity of belts. So we can store about 15,000 promethium ore here. Then once the ship's full, it'll fly back to Nauvis, it'll pick up the biter eggs that are required to do the promethium science pack, after a brief stop off at Aquilo to get a load of quantum processors. And then we can make the science packs on this ship, and then drop them down onto the ground. And this works wonderfully. The only slight downside is if it ends up sitting in Nauvis for a while, you get a lot of biter eggs just sitting on the ship and eventually hatching and getting fried by these lasers, which is a little bit silly, but never mind, we can cope with that. But it'd be really nice if this ship could also make the red and green and grey and so on science packs. And actually, we could make the red and green science packs because we've got a supply of molten iron here, we've got a supply of molten copper up here. It wouldn't be too difficult to extend the ship a bit further and have it produce the red science packs, the green science packs, just from stuff that's available in space. Grey science packs would need coal, which is possible actually. We can make coal because you can collect from asteroids, you can smash up the carbonic asteroids in order to get sulfur and carbon. And then sulfur and carbon and water, which comes from the oxide asteroids, can then be made into coal. So we can get the coal, so we'll be able to make the grenades there if we wanted to. Unfortunately, you also need a quantity of stone to make the walls, as we discussed earlier when we were talking about the grey science, and there is no stone available in space. It turns out the asteroids are not actually made of stone, or at least if they are, there is no way to extract that stone. So you'd presumably have to stop over Vulcanos or over Nauvis and have stone shipped up to the ship in order to make the walls to make the grey science packs, and that feels a bit gross and not very nice. So I think that's something that I wouldn't feel too guilty about modding in. Blue science, once again, requires sulfur, but you can get that straight out of the asteroids. That's easy. The plastic for the red circuits is a bit of a faff, but I do have a ship that is doing that. So over here, you can see we're making, ignore the quality stuff at the moment because this is kind of separate, but it shows sort of a proof of concept. We're making coal here that's going into a plastic making machine, and we are making coal here that's going into coal liquefaction, which is then getting cracked down into petroleum gas, and that's going in here. So that's allowing us to make plastic. So we can make the plastic, which means then along with the molten metals, we could make red circuits. So that's the first two things. Then the engine units, that's again is just molten iron, made into various forms, sure, but it's just molten iron. So those could be made in space quite easily. So blue science would be a little bit fiddly to get the plastic, but it's perfectly doable. It's definitely a thing I'd be very willing to do. Purple requires enormous quantities of stone, so again that's going to have exactly the same sort of problems that we would have with grey. The red circuits that we need for it, I mean, we've discussed how we can make those, that's kind of okay. The throughput might be a little bit of a struggle, but you can always build bigger and bigger if you need to. But I think the stone is going to make these kind of untenable. The sheer quantity of stone that you're going to require to make the 10 rails per science pack, and also the bricks for the electric furnaces, means that unless we can mod in a way of getting stone in space, I think making the purple science is not... I mean, it's sort of manageable if you ship the stone up in rockets, but I don't like it. I'd want to find a way of getting a bit of stone out of the asteroids we're smashing up. Yellow science is kind of similar to blue, but slightly more so, because you need the red circuits once again. You'd also need sulfuric acid, but then again that's iron, sulfur and water, and those are all things that are available in space very, very easily. So no problems there. The flying robot frames would have similar problems before. We need the acid, but again, that's a manageable thing. And then there's just metals there. The lube would once again be a little bit of an awkwardness, but again, we can get that from the coal liquefaction when we're making all of the plastic. And because we're making the plastic from the petroleum gas here, I'm not too bothered about pulling out a little bit of the heavy oil to make lube. I don't think we're going to run into a situation where we have so much petroleum gas or light oil that we can't do anymore. And then finally, the low density structures. Well, I'm actually making low density structures on this very spaceship here. You need that plastic, and then it's just copper and molten iron, and you're making low density structures. So that's not too bad. That is, or at least it is indeed manageable. So we can make all of those things on the spaceship relatively easily. I think that wouldn't be too bad. It's the purple and the grey, simply because of stone, that are bothering me. So with just the addition of a mod that allows you to collect stone from the asteroids, this would be entirely doable, I think. If you wanted to go all in on this, then you could potentially have the spaceship also providing the blue circuits, the low density structures and the rocket fuel to the planets in order to allow them to make rockets to launch whatever science packs they're making back up to that spaceship. And that would allow you to get all of the exotic science packs up there as well. It's a little bit, it's what I would probably call a stretch goal, but then that would mean that your planets would just literally be a sort of harvesting facility and a science production facility, and absolutely everything else would be done in space. And if you removed the limitations on where science packs can be made, so you said, actually I want to be able to make the orange, green, pale green, pink, blue, all of the exotic science packs in space as well, then you could just theoretically turn the ground stations into just mining facilities. So you'd be just pulling out the holmium on Fulgora and shipping it up. You'd be pulling out the tungsten on Vulcanus and shipping it up, and so on and so on. This one, Gleba would of course be Gleba and therefore difficult, but you know, you could find a way. Maybe ship the fruit up and do stuff in space with that. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of things in there that aren't going to want to be done in space, so that might require a bit more stretching of the rules, should we say. But the idea of having all of your planets just being mining outposts and then doing all of your science production and sciencing on a massive spaceship does quite appeal to me. The other possibility, I suppose, would be to have your massive spaceship that does all of the science as a stationary platform in orbit around potentially Norvis or even somewhere else if you fancied, and then have other spaceships that flit out and go and get the raw ingredients and bring them over to that spaceship. I think you'd want to have the spaceship that's doing the science production on the move, though, because if a spaceship is just sitting still, like this one is, you don't really get all that much in the way of resources coming in, and so that would be a bit of a struggle. A ship needs to move in order to keep itself properly supplied. Okay, well, I have gone on a bit more than I was really intending to about this, but there was a lot to say about science, so I hope that's all been interesting and that you're still here and have been enjoying the video. I think there'll probably be one more retrospective video where I'm going to take a bit of a look at my spaceship designs and talk a bit about how they work, because I'm quite pleased with the final design for these long-range ships that go all the way out into the back end of Beyond and have all of their production and all their self-sufficiency and defences and whatnot. And there's quite a lot of circuitry that goes into these ships as well, so I think that's interesting enough that it's going to be worth talking about. So I'll talk about that next week, so please make sure you subscribe to the channel and come along then to make so you don't miss it. The video will be coming out on next Friday as usual. And I'm currently streaming as well. So we've got a new Factorio series that will be starting on the 2nd of June. That's going to be another multiplayer one where we're going to go planet hopping and go around and look at lots and lots of different planetary mods, and with myself, Mark, Tristan, Mike, and we're going to be joined for this new series by Sophia as well. So there'll be 5 of us, which should make things even more productive between the lot of us. I'm also playing The Last Starship on Wednesdays. It's a game that's sort of a cross between Elite and RimWorld in a way, I guess. And it's got quite a lot of plot stuff in there. It's made by Introversion, so you know it's going to be interesting and quirky, and I'm quite enjoying playing that. At the time of recording, I've only actually done 1 stream, but I'm sure by the time you see this, there'll be 2 or 3 out there. So yeah, please come along and join me on a Wednesday for that one as well, and it'd be great to see you there. So, thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next videos and the streams. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.